5 small drones rising into the dark Sahel sky should not have changed world politics, but one night they did. In just 14 minutes, a single Burkinabe strike force destroyed a 12-vehicle armed convoy that international experts had quietly labeled untouchable. No foreign bombers, no massive air base, no outside command center. Just locally built drones, a buried control room in Ouagadougou, and a team of young engineers who refused to accept that their country would always be dependent on someone else to defend its own people. When the dust settled, there were no civilian casualties, no stray explosions, only a red road and a vanished threat. Inside Burkina Faso, villagers near the border heard about the mission, and for the first time in years, they believed that protection could come from within, not from distant capitals. Inside Washington, the reaction was very different. Intelligence officers wanted to know how a nation long ranked as fragile could deliver a strike this precise without a large foreign footprint. Was this a one-time success, or the sign of a much deeper transformation in African military technology and decision-making? For older Americans who remember other moments when small changes on the map led to big changes in global power, this story raises familiar questions. What happens when a country that was expected to wait for help learns to act on its own timetable? And what does it mean when that country sits in a region that has become central to counter-terrorism, migration, and global energy routes? If this opening scene makes you pause for a moment, let that pause sit with you, because it is in that pause that we begin to see the real stakes. This is not just a story about drones. It is a story about who gets to decide when a nation is safe and why a 14-minute operation in the Sahel has leaders in Paris, London, and Washington quietly rechecking all of their assumptions about Ibrahim Traoré and the future of West African security. In the days leading up to the 14-minute strike, a chain of small signals began to surface along Burkina Faso's southern frontier, each one easy to ignore on its own, but unmistakable when pieced together by the analysts watching closely. Fishermen reported hearing engines at unusual hours. A teacher from a nearby village noticed tire tracks that did not match any local vehicles. A herder named Issouf, who had lost 2 cousins to a similar raid years earlier, told local security that he saw a line of headlights far out on the plains, moving with deliberate spacing. He did not know the meaning behind it, but the fear in his voice was enough for the regional command post to alert Ouagadougou. For villagers like him, the threat was never theoretical. A convoy could erase a community in minutes, and families lived with that knowledge every single day. Inside Burkina Faso's underground command center, the atmosphere grew heavier as each piece of information arrived. Analysts examined grainy satellite snapshots, drone footage, and intercepted chatter in 3 different dialects. The picture they formed was clear. A 12-vehicle armed column, equipped with mounted guns and reinforced pickups, was moving toward a cluster of villages known for being understaffed and poorly connected to the main road. Under the old system, the response would have required coordination with international partners, diplomatic clearance, and long meetings. By the time approval arrived, the convoy would have completed its mission and vanished. But under the new doctrine implemented by Ibrahim Traoré, the country no longer accepted delays that cost innocent lives. Everything, from detection to authorization, could now happen locally. What made this moment extraordinary was not just the confirmed threat, but the tools Burkina Faso now had at its disposal. The Jamila drones assigned to the mission were designed not in a foreign lab, but in modest Sahel workshops, where engineers worked under flickering lights, soldered recycled components, and constantly rewrote software to survive heat waves and thick dust. Each drone had been tested dozens of times under real Sahel conditions, and each software update reflected lessons learned from earlier missions. Their success was not luck. It was the product of hundreds of hours of trial, error, and persistence. For the first time, a national defense system fully created and operated inside Burkina Faso was being called upon to stop an imminent threat. On the night of the strike, the command room fell silent as the convoy crossed into the engagement zone. Operators watched the convoy advance in tight formation, headlights faint, dust trailing behind. The mission chief, a seasoned officer who had spent years relying on foreign air support, simply nodded when the moment arrived. A young analyst, barely 27, sent the launch authorization. Thousands of miles away, powerful countries tracked the activity through satellite feeds, but did not intervene. They did not expect the small buried command room to be capable of altering the battlefield so decisively. Above the plains, the 5 drones adjusted their altitude and aligned themselves with satellite-assisted thermal mapping. The pilots relied on short bursts of encrypted communication and a targeting algorithm written by a group of engineers who had once been dismissed as hobby technicians. The first drone struck the lead vehicle, instantly stopping the convoy. The second drone hit the central truck, splitting the column. The third, fourth, and fifth drones completed the sequence with surgical precision, ensuring that none of the armed men could escape. Every strike followed strict civilian safety protocols. Not a single home or nearby road was touched. For the families living just miles away, the only sign of the operation was a distant muffled noise, followed by an unfamiliar silence. When the final drone transmitted confirmation that the target was neutralized, the room did not erupt in applause. Instead, the operators stared at the screens with a mix of disbelief and sobering clarity. They understood they had not simply stopped an attack. They had proven a national capability that foreign analysts once believed impossible. For the first time in years, Burkina Faso had acted entirely on its own timeline, with its own tools, its own intelligence, and its own young minds behind the consoles. The question lingering in everyone's thoughts wasn't whether the mission had succeeded, but how this new autonomy would reshape the balance of power far beyond the borders of the Sahel. The turning point of the entire operation emerged not from the moment the drones struck their targets, but from the wave of reactions that followed across villages, military units, and foreign intelligence centers. In the border communities closest to the threat, people awoke to an unfamiliar stillness. A grandmother named Mariam had spent the night hiding her grandchildren inside a clay hut, expecting the sound of gunfire at any minute. Instead, she stepped outside at dawn and found the sky clear and the horizon calm. For many families, that quiet felt like a miracle they did not fully understand. It was the first morning in years when children walked from their homes without gripping a parent's hand. Fear had become a habit, and now, for a brief moment, that habit broke. Inside the armed forces, the emotional impact was immediate and powerful. Officers crowded around screens replaying the drone footage, their expressions shifting from disbelief to pride. A senior colonel, known for doubting the new autonomous doctrine, reportedly removed his cap and whispered that he had never imagined seeing such precision coming from equipment built in modest Sahel workshops. Younger soldiers, many of whom had grown up hearing that African militaries could not innovate, suddenly felt a surge of dignity. It was not the thrill of domination that energized them. It was the realization that their nation had acted with competence that required no foreign supervision. The idea that they were capable of protecting their own people on their own timing lifted morale in a way that no parade or speech ever could. In government circles, reaction was equally intense. Cabinet members received short briefings confirming that no civilians had been harmed, and that the mission had been completed in a time frame that would have been impossible under previous systems reliant on external authorization. Advisors who had once argued for slow consensus-based strategies now watched the data and recognized that a historic shift had occurred. A defense model built on local expertise had just outperformed the multinational procedures that had dominated the Sahel for decades. Thousands of miles away, the atmosphere inside foreign intelligence agencies turned anxious. Analysts in Paris held emergency meetings after satellite images showed the convoy completely neutralized, with no traceable signature of foreign assistance. In Washington, specialists reviewed thermal scans and targeting patterns, but could not match the drones to any known imported design. The conclusion they reached unsettled them. Burkina Faso had not only acquired new capabilities, it had developed its own operational rhythm, one that bypassed the systems international powers were accustomed to monitoring and controlling. A capability that acted faster than foreign bureaucracies made them uneasy, because speed often changes the balance of power. Across Africa, social media platforms erupted in a different kind of emotional crescendo. Young engineers shared messages celebrating the success as proof that African innovation could shape the future without waiting for permission from abroad. Videos of local technicians working with recycled components inside dusty workshops spread widely. Students from universities in Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou reposted the footage with captions expressing pride and hope. It was more than a military achievement. It became a cultural moment that symbolized the possibility of a continent relying on its own ingenuity. For the families living near the strike zone, the consequences were grounded in daily life. Farmers returned to their fields with a confidence they had not felt in years. Parents allowed their children to walk to school without escort. Small markets reopened their stalls earlier than usual. A farmer named Yakuba said that when he heard the strike had been carried out using equipment built entirely by Burkinabe technicians, he felt something inside him settle. He described it as the feeling of knowing that his country was no longer waiting for help that never came in time. Diplomatic circles across Europe struggled to craft a response. Officials issued statements calling for transparency and investigation, but behind closed doors they debated what it meant for a Sahel nation to operate independently at such speed. Their long-standing assumption that African defense structures required external oversight had just been dismantled by 14 minutes of precision. The fact that Burkina Faso released no dramatic footage and issued no boastful announcement made the situation even more unsettling. Silence can be a powerful signal, and in this case it indicated discipline rather than secrecy. Inside the country, that same silence carried a different message. Engineers returned to their workshops without giving interviews. Soldiers returned to their posts without celebration. Communities resumed their routines with a sense of relief mixed with curiosity. People wondered not only how the mission had succeeded, but what this new capability meant for the future of their nation and the stability of the Sahel. That question, quiet yet persistent, lingered long after the operation ended, shaping the atmosphere in ways statistics could not fully capture. The aftermath of the 14-minute strike created a ripple of consequences that reached far beyond the battlefield, touching the lives of civilians, reshaping national politics, and altering the emotional landscape of a country that had endured years of uncertainty. In the villages closest to the border, the change was felt almost immediately. Families who had been living in a constant state of fear began leaving their doors open during the day again. Children who once stayed home out of caution walked to school in small groups, laughing more freely as if the air itself had become lighter. A local nurse named Aminata said that the night after the strike, she heard something she had not heard in months. It was not silence, but the sound of a community returning to normal life, with neighbors chatting in courtyards and families preparing food outside without looking over their shoulders. She described it as the kind of normalcy that most people take for granted, but that her village had nearly forgotten. As news of the successful operation spread across the country, it ignited a wave of political reflection. Lawmakers in the capital held closed-door meetings to reassess the national security strategy. Many of them had long argued for stronger partnerships with foreign powers, believing that Burkina Faso lacked the capacity to defend itself without outside help. The strike challenged that assumption. Suddenly, the idea of autonomy was no longer seen as an idealistic goal, but as a practical path that had produced real, measurable results. Members of Parliament who once hesitated to support domestic innovation began pushing for increased funding for local engineering programs and technical schools. What had been viewed as a fringe initiative, supported only by a handful of believers, now stood at the center of national debate. Within the military, the operation triggered a deep internal shift. Commanders noticed that morale had risen sharply within a matter of hours. Soldiers who had been weary and frustrated by years of resource shortages found renewed purpose in the realization that they were no longer dependent on outside approval to defend their homeland. Young recruits, many of whom had joined the armed forces seeking stability for their families, now saw themselves as part of a new chapter in the country's history. A captain stationed near the northern front lines remarked that he had never seen his unit so focused. He said they looked at the strike not as a moment of triumph, but as a standard they needed to maintain. It gave them a sense of responsibility that was heavier, but also more inspiring than anything they had felt before. Politically, the operation had a stabilizing effect that few had predicted. Public confidence in the government surged as citizens began to view national leadership through a different lens. Instead of seeing leaders as administrators trying to balance foreign pressure and domestic demands, people started seeing them as architects of a plan that could secure the country's future. Crowds gathered in markets and transportation hubs to discuss the implications, not with cynicism, but with genuine curiosity. For the first time in a generation, national conversations shifted from complaints about instability to questions about technological potential and long-term strategy. Even elders who typically held traditional views expressed cautious optimism. They had lived through eras when foreign involvement dominated national affairs, and seeing a homegrown effort succeed carried a meaning that resonated deeply with them. Civil society groups also reacted. Nonprofits focused on education and development began collaborating with military engineers to understand how the new capabilities could be adapted for civilian uses, such as agricultural mapping, early fire detection, and emergency medical supply delivery. University professors who once lamented the lack of opportunities for young graduates now saw a growing ecosystem forming around local technical talent. Students enrolled in engineering and computer science programs at unprecedented rates. Parents who once urged their children to pursue careers abroad for safety and stability started encouraging them to stay, believing that their future might now be tied to the country's transformation. Internationally, the consequences were equally significant. Several neighboring governments noted the shift in regional dynamics, recognizing that Burkina Faso's growing autonomy could inspire similar movements within their own borders. Delegations from Mali, Niger, and Chad quietly requested technical briefings to understand what had changed and how those changes might influence future regional coordination. European governments expressed concern privately, fearing that a decrease in dependence on foreign military support might weaken their influence in the Sahel. Analysts warned that the success of the strike could encourage a broader re-evaluation of defense partnerships across West Africa. Through all of these effects, one sentiment became clear across the entire country. People no longer viewed sovereignty as an abstract political slogan. They felt it in their daily routines, in the safety of their children, in the confidence of their soldiers, and in the forward-looking tone of national conversations. The emotional and political landscape had shifted. Yet another layer of this unfolding story waited beyond the horizon, as the world began considering how the United States and other global powers would interpret this transformation. From Washington's perspective, the 14-minute strike was far more than a regional skirmish. Intelligence analysts at the Pentagon reviewed the operation with an attention usually reserved for major geopolitical events. What unsettled them was not only the precision of the drones, but the independence behind the mission. For decades, American strategy in the Sahel had relied on the notion that no country in the region could conduct a rapid, high-accuracy strike without external assistance. The footage and satellite data from Burkina Faso challenged that assumption. A senior defense official reportedly noted that the operation demonstrated a level of autonomy that could shift the strategic balance across West Africa. He explained that when a nation gains the ability to act instantly without waiting for foreign approval, it also gains a measure of political leverage that can reshape alliances. In Europe, the reaction carried a different tone. Governments that had long maintained military training missions in the region worried that their influence might decline if Burkina Faso continued to strengthen its domestic capabilities. Policy advisors in Paris and Brussels raised questions about how a fully autonomous Sahelian defense model might affect future cooperation agreements. Some argued that greater independence could limit the ability of external powers to guide regional policies. Others warned that if neighboring countries adopted similar systems, long-standing security arrangements could be forced into rapid revision. Across the African continent, however, the sentiment was largely supportive. Leaders in Mali, Niger, and Chad privately expressed admiration, viewing the operation as evidence that regional actors could take responsibility for their own stability. News outlets in East and Southern Africa aired segments discussing whether the Burkinabe model could be replicated elsewhere. Analysts pointed out that the success of the mission signaled a broader shift in African strategic thinking, one driven by local expertise rather than foreign templates. Inside the United States, national security officials debated the implications with a mix of caution and respect. Some believed the strike could complicate American coordination in the Sahel by reducing visibility into local operations. Others viewed it as an opportunity to engage with a country that had demonstrated professionalism and discipline. What united all sides was the recognition that the geopolitical landscape was changing. The question facing Washington was simple, but serious. If Burkina Faso could achieve this level of control now, what would the next 5 years bring? And how would those advancements reshape regional partnerships that once seemed unshakable? The 14-minute strike now stands as a turning point that continues to echo far beyond the dusty border roads where it unfolded. It has forced the world to question long-held assumptions about who controls the rhythm of power in the Sahel. More importantly, it has raised a deeper question for the United States and Europe, one that touches not only on strategy, but on the future of influence in a region that has endured hardship for generations. As the data settles and the satellite images fade from the screens, a quieter truth emerges. When a nation like Burkina Faso finds the confidence to shape its own destiny through discipline, patience, and technical ingenuity, the entire map of the region begins to shift. Yet this moment of triumph also carries its own warning. If the regional alliances around Ibrahim Traoré do not solidify, and if internal cohesion weakens, the progress seen today could become fragile. A single disruption in supply chains or a coordinated foreign pressure campaign could slow the program's momentum. The next year will determine whether this breakthrough becomes a permanent pillar of national defense or a brief moment of advantage overshadowed by external forces. Analysts in Washington have privately noted that if the trend continues, the Sahel could witness the rise of a fully integrated regional command capable of acting within minutes rather than weeks. Such a development would redefine every existing partnership in West Africa and reshape the entire landscape of Africa news. It may also set off a recalibration of global strategy that few were prepared to confront. So, the question lingers. Is Ibrahim Traoré building a new foundation for stability, or is the world witnessing the beginning of a profound geopolitical realignment that will challenge the old order in ways not yet understood? Only time will decide which path unfolds, but the responsibility to stay informed belongs to all of us. If this story stirred something in you, take a moment to reflect on why. Each of us carries a belief in justice, in dignity, in the right of a people to stand on their own feet. When you share your thoughts, you add your voice to a conversation that reaches far beyond this screen. May clarity guide the leaders of tomorrow. May wisdom protect the innocent. And may God watch over every family who still hopes for peace in the Sahel.